you know, I got into computers to avoid people is something I like to say. And
Me
it
too.
went great for a while. And then I got so good at computers that they put me in charge of people. I thought something went horribly wrong.
Welcome, Robert. Great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you. We've got a few interesting things to talk about today that are a bit different to normal, and I want to explore. So let's start with something you said to me before, that every problem is a system problem. What do you mean by that?
It's something that I observed and eventually realized after years of leading software engineering teams. We get into computers at a young age probably because we like the certainty of them. The same inputs give the same outputs. It can be comforting for an introvert like me coming up in a world full of people that I didn't really know what to do with. And so we lean hard into, hey, let's build systems. We create softwares and architectures, and you do the things we expect them to do, and that's comforting. That's fantastic. But as I grew up in that career, I got into computers to avoid people is something I like to say. And
Me
it
too.
went great for a while. And then I got so good at computers that they put me in charge of people. I thought something went horribly wrong because people don't work like that. They are not deterministic. They're probabilistic. And they have different rules, and they don't, the same inputs don't give you the same outputs. And this vexed me for a long time. I made a lot of mistakes and messed up quite a bit at coming up as a leader. And then I eventually figured out, they're running on a system too, but it has different rules. Technology systems run on logic. Humans run on emotion and safety. And I kept trying to use logic to lead my team of humans, and it just kept backfiring. And I had to stop and say, something's wrong. I've got to figure out where the disconnect is. And I had to go back quite a ways, in my previous training and previous career to figure that out. And once I did, it just completely changed the way I approach the human aspect of engineering leadership.
It's an interesting observation that people are probabilistic. There's all this talk at the moment about AI and it being non-deterministic. And in fact,
Yes.
It is by design probabilistic too. And then we're comparing it to people and saying we can't do this thing because AI is not deterministic, but not people. And that's, as you say, down to the fact that we are very emotional. We don't follow that logic structured approach. We get driven by our fears and our emotions. So how did that change how you approach things as a leader?
Well, I had to look for those hidden rules that aren't logical, that are probabilistic. And it made me realize that human teams operate in layers, kind of like, the 7 OSI layers. You have the most abstract on top, and then you work all the way down until you're working on the hardware at the very bottom. And I realized that for all of our modern ideas of, agile and software leadership frameworks and management frameworks, those are all great, but they're running on a hardware system that hasn't had an update in at least 100,000 years, the human OS. And then figuring out, hey, what needs to be patched in that human OS? What workarounds do we need to come up with to have these inputs that we keep giving the system to really have the desired outputs? And that's what started me thinking down the path of a human systems approach for software engineering leaders.
So what does that look like then? If we think of humans as systems, what does that mean day to day? How do you change what you do as a leader for that?
So the first struggle with that really is seeing that the system is there, because it's invisible to us most of the time. And we'll be working with our teams and we'll have a problem. Maybe someone isn't performing as well, or they're seem checked out, or they're disconnected. We reach for labels when it comes to you. If a system is not giving the desired outputs, you wonder, well, what are the rules of that system? And what inputs are we giving it to receive these outputs? But once humans get involved, we flip to something completely different. And we reach for labels. We say, okay, that person's difficult. That person's a diva. This person is lazy, and it's so comforting to reach for those labels, because that means, we figured it out and the pressure isn't on us anymore, because that's a them problem, not a us problem. And the more I observed these human systems at work, I realized they're just responding to what's logical in their environment. So if someone's being quiet, something taught them earlier that speaking up isn't worth the risk. Maybe they got a sharp correction in a meeting, or they kept raising an issue and everyone kept ignoring it. I used to work with a brilliant engineer, and she would come up to me and say, I have a Cassandra complex because I keep telling people this is going to end badly. And they never listen to me, and it ends badly, and I've just given up.
Yeah, absolutely. So you really struck on something that has bugged me for the entire time I've been a manager for people. And we talk about that performance and we label somebody as a poor performer. And that bugs me because it's never as simple as that. There's somebody as a poor performer in that context, in that system, in what you're doing. And as you say, we label it as a them problem. They are a poor performer. But we as a manager or somebody else in a management team hired them at some point. And at that point, we believed they were going to be a good performer. Now, they probably didn't kind of come in with the intention of being bad, and they probably didn't deceive us in an interview if we interviewed well.
Right.
So it's not a them problem. It's maybe not an us problem. It's perhaps more of a problem with the system. Is why did the system identify this person as a good fit and then turn them into a bad fit? What was the mistake that we made? So how do you approach addressing that and figuring out how we fix that system?
It's a great question. And for years, as I was coming up as an engineering manager, anytime we had a separation from the team, I always took that as a personal failure because I thought, okay, this person made sense when I hired them. They looked like they were the right person for the job. What happened? And I was using the wrong framework to manage them with. And once I realized that, it came down to I wasn't giving them what they needed to be successful in their role. So, you know, it's easy to just hand someone a Jira task and say, get this done. And, you know, that works for a while, but the entire context of what needs to be done and the expectations are hard to put across in a Jira task. And are you providing them context? Are you providing them support? Are you there to answer questions for them? Are you just trying to get them out of your office? Which was a failure mode I fell into regularly because I was still holding on to my individual contributor role while I was trying to manage too. It was additive. It wasn't a replacement for my duties. And I spent way too long thinking, okay, how can I get this person on their way so I can go back to what I really want to do, which is write some code. And every one of those, it was either because of me or something else going on in the system. Maybe it was the whole company environment, things beyond my control. But it's almost always they weren't given the support they needed. Maybe I wasn't clear in my expectations. Like you said at the beginning, no one says, I'm going to take this job and do poorly until I get fired, and that's my goal. Probably not. We should look at that more closely.
Absolutely. So there's a couple of things you mentioned there, like not giving them what was needed and holding on to your IC role. And I feel your pain. I've been there and made both of those mistakes as well as many more. My concern right now is, as we've had all this hype around AI, we need to increase productivity, interest rates have gone up, cash isn't free anymore, downsizing, thinning out, cutting out management things, particularly cutting out engineering managers and pushing for flatter organizations, many of which are potentially good things. There's also a risk, I think, that we make some of these problems worse. If we're cutting out the engineering managers and having more focus on them being ICs, we're increasing that likelihood of them holding on to an IC role and feeling that and not giving people what they need. Have you any thoughts on how an engineering manager today can balance this and try and still give their team what they need while, let's be honest, having their own emotional worries about how safe is their position? Are they going to be the next round of layoffs? How do they make sure that they're still showing value beyond just looking after their team?
Right. And the effect of generative AI on software engineering is probably one of the most profound areas that's feeling this disruption right now. And it's predictable on the one hand because this disconnect between how human systems and technical systems work, it's always been there. But there was a throttle on it, which was how long it took to actually write the code. And that slowed down the iteration time between these touch points in the human system. And now we can generate code faster than we ever have before. And it's putting strain on everything downstream from that, including the humans involved. I think for leaders and software engineers as well, it's time to rethink our fundamental assumptions on what it means to be either one of those things. A lot of software engineers, myself included, want to hold on to the craft. They say, oh, I'm a C# developer or a Rust developer, and that's the tool I like to use, and I really love using that tool. And we have to reframe that now as, okay, well, the tool is a means to an end. What is that end, and how can we be better at that, regardless of what the tool is, or even if that tool is operated by a human anymore?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely a pain point and a tension a lot of people are seeing at the moment.
Yeah,
They miss the craft. They want to be lighting the code. The code was a fun bit of the job to them.
absolutely.
And I
So,
can empathize with that because I got started out writing code and that was the fun bit.
mhm,
It was only when I started in my career that perhaps because I kind of joined the industry through the dot-com hype, I got interested in, well, how do I grow a business? How's that side of things?
right,
Why am I writing the software? Oh, the software is there to support a business and to create outcomes, not for me to create code, which has been a real tension all the way through my career. As I want to create
right.
code, I want to create the craft, but I've run businesses. I run a business now. I've been an executive in VC-backed startups. Got to
Mhm.
deliver a business outcome. Got to make the sales. Got to actually generate the revenue to keep the investors happy and to keep paying the wages at the end of each month. How do we balance that tension?
It's been a constant source of friction, and I see it a lot because I came up through software development to solve a problem. My first, it wasn't my first official engineering job in my career, but it was the first programming I did that I got paid for. I was working as a museum curator, as an anthropologist, and we had a big data management problem because we had tens of thousands of artifacts coming into the museum and from archaeological research in the field, and we had no way to deal with that. We didn't have a budget for software for that, but I had been a hobbyist programmer growing up, and I thought, let me just see what I can do. And I ended up spending 100% of my time writing that software. I fell in love with it all over again. And what that gave me was the perspective of the business outcome first. The business had a problem. I didn't write that software because I thought it was an interesting intellectual challenge for me, but it was. But I had to show the business that was paying me, hey, here's why this was worth it. And the more we hold on to the value of the craft intrinsically, I think the more disconnect we're going to have between uh, what the business really needs to survive and why we are employed by them to provide that.
I wonder if that's why I found it easy to make that transition to the outcomes. Because again, I didn't really start programming to programming. I started
Hmm.
off as a 9-year-old kid wanting to make games and wanting to make AI, wanting to follow up on that Asimov books I'd read and so on. So I
Yeah,
was looking for that outcome rather than crafting the code. I didn't get concepts of code as a craft until I was 20, 21 as I started reading industry journals and magazines
yeah.
and books. So maybe that's part of the disconnect. Again, like you, came to I want to solve a problem, and that was the code was a means to an end there. So I want to pull at that a little bit more because we talk a lot about self-taught developers versus do you need a degree, and there's always a very much focus on engineering background or coming from STEM.
Right.
Apology does not really fit that. How did that happen?
By complete sequence of improbable fortunate accidents. And if I can test your audience's patience a little bit, I'll give you the short version of the long story, which is it started with my father in the 1960s. He grew up on a farm in central Texas and came to the big city of Houston in 1968 to get a job repairing cash registers with a company called NCR. They went on to be quite big. And he started out repairing these analog point of sale systems with a hammer and a punch. And in the 1970s, they had their digital transformation, one of the first industries to really have a big one. And it went to computers. So he started swapping out hard drives and motherboards. And he said, this is probably going to be pretty big. I think I would like my son to have some exposure to this. And 1982, I'm 10 years old, and he gives me a Commodore 64 computer.
Nice.
And I just absolutely fell in love with it. I read the owner's manual front to back, and it got right to the good stuff. I mean, memory maps, arrays, all the stuff you usually go through a computer science degree to get. It didn't give you much theory. It just said, here's a box of tools and here's how to use them. Go have fun. And we couldn't afford software, so I had to. If I wanted to do something, I had to write my own. And I spent 10 years with that machine and just absolutely loved it. So the smart thing to do would have been to study computer science when it came time to go to university. I did not do the smart thing because I had what we would call imposter syndrome. Now I thought, I'm just a kid who read a book. I don't really know how to program computers. I'll get laughed out of there. So I followed my heart, which is usually a bad idea, but 30 years later, it worked out. I studied psychology and I got a psychology degree. And maybe I wanted to learn more about those humans that I was trying to hide from with that Commodore 64. But I didn't know how to do anything. I was reaching the very end of my degree program. I was like, this is great. I got all this theory and knowledge and no usable skills. I needed one more elective to pass, so I signed up for an archaeology field methods class my senior year, where we actually went out into the field with the archaeology professors and worked on a dig. And I was like, this is the missing link. I can use my hands to do something again. Dove into that, got a master's degree in anthropology, and then entered the museum as a curator and their resident archaeologist. So I'd get called out all over South Texas saying, hey, we found this. We were digging and we found something. And I'd go check it out. And that was great fun. And that led to the data management problem. I've gone full circle twice in my life. And the first time was starting out with that Commodore 64 when I was a little kid, taking this long detour through the social sciences, and then arriving at software engineering again with what I call the ruthless pragmatism of the self-taught code mechanic. That's what I was. I was a mechanic.
Love that phrase. I think there's probably something else that's really useful there that you haven't quite elaborated on, but you did a master's as well. I did a master's in business, MBA, so everyone can hate me for being a bean counter now. But one of the most useful things I actually took from my master's that wasn't covered in my bachelor's was how to go and look at research papers, how to go and read them, how to go and look at the academic
Right.
journals, better understanding of the social sciences. I think that's incredibly useful and missing from a lot of software engineering degrees, that we don't get taught how to go and look at evidence and pull a paper apart and say, well, actually, was this a good study? Is it useful? Can we extrapolate from this? Oh, you did a study with 4 people. That's not really a convincing argument of,
Right.
you haven't got a big enough sample size and so on. So how useful has that master's been when you come in and think about the things that we say, when we say like agile is good or bad, or TDD is good or bad, or all these different things, and somebody presents a study?
That's a great distinction to make. And it was a long time before I looked back and realized what it was. In undergraduate studies, you are absorbing and regurgitating knowledge. It's how well can you learn something, memorize it, and say it back. In graduate studies, it's how do you generate knowledge and know that it's valid. And I think that's been incredibly useful, but I didn't realize it until I was about 15 years into my career, where I had an opportunity. I'd been through the company I started with. They kept me for 15 years. I started out as an access report writer and ended their VP of technology, overseeing all software engineering and IT operations. And we got acquired, and then we got acquired again. And the company that was my third employer in this career said, hey, we've got this other division. They've got a software engineering team and they're really struggling. Robert, can you come help us find out what's wrong with that? And I went in there with my anthropologist hat on and I studied them for 30 days without making a single recommendation or change. I just did total immersion with them. And I approached that like I would approach an academic research paper, where I gathered my evidence, I presented my hypotheses, and I tested them, and I presented it to the board. Here's what I see. Here is how I would solve this problem. Let me know what you think. And they thought I should be their VP of engineering. So that's how I ended up at the fourth company.
And how did those changes go when you actually went and made the changes?
Fortunately, I appear to have been mostly right about the things that I saw. The team was struggling so badly, they would go months and months, sometimes over a year, between software releases. And the board of directors was fed up. From their distance, they saw a bad team, and they were ready to just clean house and start over from scratch. And I went in there And I mapped out what the real power dynamics were and how the real decision-making processes worked and all the inputs and outputs. And I said, this is a systems problem. These aren't bad people. They're operating in a broken system. And I gave them a 30, 60, 90-day plan to turn it around. And they gave me the green light. And we started doing quarterly releases within the first quarter of this change. We had to clear out a backlog of it first. And then after a few iterations of that, we were releasing every 2 weeks without firing a single person, without changing a single person in a position of power, just by fixing the broken things that were hiding underneath the org chart.
Yep. That sounds so familiar. I've been hired into a couple of teams over the years to fix things that are broken, and every single time it hasn't really been a bad team. It's been a bad organization. It's been bad leadership. It's been bad processes. It's been that inertia of, well, this is how we do things. We can't change it.
I hate that one.
Yeah, this is the way it is. And I've joked about it in the past that in one of them, it almost felt that all I did was just sit there and say, why? Until people were just so embarrassed that they just tried something different. Because it was very much a case of, you're smart people. You don't need me to change anything. You just need somebody to come and say, well, why don't we try something different? Why does it have to be that way?
It's like they were waiting for permission. There's something about the momentum of how things have worked. It's etched into the team's culture the way a river carves out a canyon in sandstone. It's been going on so long. No one remembers how it started, but it looks like it's impossible to change at some point. And I love if a 2-year-old child can break the whole system down just by asking why repeatedly until everyone gives up.
So you're saying I'm a 2-year-old child?
You have the superpower of a 2-year-old child. They just want to know why, and it's a beautiful thing. It's a tragic that we tend to lose that over time, that curiosity of not accepting anything at face value.
Yeah, and the willingness to actually ask why and not feel that we're going to look stupid or we're going to be potentially wrong if we do somehow. And another point about that, in 2 of those teams, I was told that I had to fire several people because they were problematic. My concern with that is you go in and you start firing the people and hire a new team, as you said. That's a hell of a lot of domain knowledge and experience. Now, some of that knowledge and experience was, that's the way we've always done things. But a lot of that is also, well, that's why we do those things. There are good reasons for some of them. So if you just replace people and view them as, we can just get rid of this one and swap in another one that are just the same, you're going to lose all that domain knowledge. You're going to lose all that experience. You lose the fact that those people have worked together. They know how to work together in some respects. So, if you hire a whole new bunch of people, you've got to form that team again. You've got to form that bond. You've got to construct all that. You've got to somehow try and recover all of that domain knowledge. So I'm totally with you. It really should be go in there, observe for 30, 60, 90 days, understand the systems, understand where the challenges are, and then ask questions, poke around, test some hypotheses, and see what you can do to move the needle without having to dramatically change everything.
Absolutely. And you touched on something that really, it gets under my skin sometimes, and that's the idea of that the people on your engineering team are interchangeable components, like you would swap out a different message bus service or a different database provider. The interfaces cover all that for us when we can change out implementations at will. Human systems don't work like that. And no matter how well you have documented, no matter how big your wiki is or Confluence, wherever you store your institutional knowledge, I promise you there's an order of magnitude more in the living memory of the team. And treating your engineering team like a long-term investment instead of a commodity is one of the biggest, I think, success indicators for companies when I work with them. I'll ask them that question directly, like, do you view engineering as a long-term resource or a cost center? And that'll tell me a lot about the nature of the problems I'm probably going to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking as you mentioned that, I can't remember the numbers, but I'm sure I've seen something as what's the right word? As small as if you take an 8-person team and change 2
Hmm.
people, you've effectively got a new team. You've changed the whole dynamics. So
Yeah.
you've got to, just if you go in there and fire one person, hire somebody new, and hire a replacement, you've changed the whole dynamic of a team. You've got to reform that. You've got to restructure, rebuild the bonds, rebuild the trust and structure of that. And that is all disruptive on a team. It takes time to get that team back working well. Well, if you can find a way for the existing people to work and find a way for them to work better, you're retaining all that knowledge. So we're kind of touching on culture a little bit. How do you view culture as impacting engineering organizations?
I think culture is hugely important. I think I've been on record saying that everything is downstream from culture. If you don't have a healthy culture for your organization and engineering team, no management framework, no perk is going to save you from dysfunction. I've said that every team has a culture, and if you have a default culture, then it will put the funk in dysfunction because entropy isn't just a good idea, it's the law. And so if you don't guide them deliberately with care, you'll get random noise, and it's usually not something you can bank your business on. If I had to tell them to focus on one thing more than anything else, it's building a healthy culture.
I really like what you said there, that every team has a culture. I think that's something that too many leaders forget, and I think too many, all of us forget, and that every team has its own culture that's created by the people in the team, created by the team lead or the tech lead or the engineering manager that oversees that team. And you can be the CEO sat in your office somewhere saying, this is our values, this is the culture. But unless you live that, and you live that in front of your executive team, and unless they live that in front of their departments and they make sure their directors or whoever's beneath them lives that through the department, unless every single person lives that, actually the culture changes at every level, depending on how each person interprets that, depending on what their actions are. And let's face it, culture is not something that's written on the wall. It's not what you say it is. It's what you do. And far too few people, I think, realize that and actually consciously live through the values and culture that they want rather than what they say they want. How do you think we can change that? How can we be better as leaders to really live the culture that we want? Walk the walk, if you will.
Well, this is a topic near and dear to my heart. I've got a whole talk I give about it at Tech Leader Summit called An Anthropologist's Guide to Engineering Cultures. And you touched on it directly. Culture isn't taught, it's caught. No one cares what your core values are, what's written on your website, what's on the wall in the break room. Uh, your team is watching, and they learn from watching, and they learn by watching what their leader does. So if you say, we value work-life balance, and you're sending Slack messages constantly at 10 o'clock at night and on the weekends, your team's going to know the real culture rule is there is no work-life balance. Um, and they're modeling everything that leadership does. So if you want to have a culture be a certain way, you have to lead by example. And a lot of leadership frameworks operate on what you as a leader are doing in the room, and that's very important. And it can make a big impact on your team. Culture is what happens when nobody's watching. They are the core values that get instilled into the team through their interactions with each other and with you. It's a system. Culture is just beliefs and behaviors shared by a group of people that they use to adapt to their environment. That's my quick and dirty recovering anthropologist definition of culture. And so if you want them to have a different culture, you have to change the environment that they're adapting to. And that's firmly in the leader's wheelhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that example of Slack at the weekend because I think that's something that is so easy to accidentally create the wrong culture.
Yes.
So I'm thinking of 2 examples here, and that I'm certain that I have done the Slack at the weekend. And it's not that I wanted people on my team to work at the weekend. So I was excited about my work and I had an idea, one of those
Yes.
things where you're thinking about an interesting problem all week. And then, 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, you're, I don't know, walking the dog and suddenly you go, aha, that's it. So, you get home, turn on the laptop. I've got to write this down before I forget it, and bash it out. And I know that I've had a couple of roles where I have been so excited about what we've been doing and infused about it that when I've solved that problem I've been thinking about or been struggling with for weeks, I wanted to make a note of it so I don't forget it,
Right.
and get it sent out to people so that when they get in the office Monday morning, they can pick it up. That is so easy to be so excited and consumed in that excitement to forget that actually, if aside of Slack, they're not there seeing your enthusiasm and your, wow, I've had this brilliant ta-da moment while I'm walking the dog. I want to share this before I forget it. Nobody will see it till Monday, so it doesn't matter, but I want to get it down.
Right. And their phones go ding.
Yeah, from the other side, they don't see any of that. It's just like, oh, he's messaging us at the weekend. I better do something about that. So it's so easy to accidentally create the wrong culture there. And the other classic example I've seen of this, and this is something that I've called out several CEOs on, is that if you have the title CEO or CTO or whatever, and you wander around the office or you wander around Slack or however you do it, but I've seen this particularly badly in the office. It's really nice that you talk to maybe the junior people and, don't kind of be aloof. But you've got to be really careful there. And I've seen several CEOs talk to junior people and go, hi, Bob, what are you working on? Now I'm looking at this and they say, well, it would be great if it did this feature. And what they thought in their heads was, oh, I'm being interested in my staff. I'm showing an interest. I'm saying their work's good. And I'm saying, wouldn't this be a cool feature? And I'm sharing, I'm collaborating and being one of the team. Then they wander off and promptly forget about that. What that junior developer heard was, the CEO wants it to do this. Hell, I better start working on it right now. And I have come into organizations several times where I've seen this happening and I've later gone up to the junior developer and why are you working on this other thing now? No, they didn't want you to work on it. They were just making a passing comment of they've forgotten what it is. They won't remember that, but they are going to remember that you didn't ship the ticket that you're supposed to be working on. And then I've called the CEOs aside and said, look, you need to be careful how you talk to people because they took that as, thou shalt work on this right now. CEO said so. And you thought, you're just making a passing observation that this is cool. And every single CEO I've picked that up on has gone, oh, hell, I didn't mean that. So it's a very easy mistake to make, thinking that you're being enthusiastic and accidentally creating the wrong culture. And then we see this complaint from software engineers that management keeps changing the requirements. Management keeps, and it's that miscommunication creating that accidental culture. How do we avoid that?
Yeah, with no malice aforethought. They will give new direction. And I call that the power gradient at work. And engineers especially are sensitive to those. Well, I think all humans are aware of something that the person transmitting that signal says, oh, I'm just being interested and helpful and engaged. And the person receiving it says, great, now my task list has been interrupted with something at the very top. And, I have to coach leaders that with, great power comes great responsibility. And they really have to understand how to see what feels like, harmless banter to them from the perspective of the person receiving it with that steep power gradient. It feels like a command. And this is ultimately what was tearing apart that team that the board brought me in to rescue, is that they had so many people talking directly to engineers saying, oh, it'd be great if we had this, it'd be great if we had that. Presidents of the company, department heads from other departments. It got so bad that customers could call up their favorite engineer and advocate for their feature. And I mean, it's just total chaos. And there's no way to coordinate that if everyone can talk to everyone. So the first thing I did was, okay, we're going to have a single point of truth on the order of things that are to be worked on. And that's going to be the product management team. We have a product management team. Let's use them for their intended purpose. You can ask anyone anything. I would never put up a barrier to communication. You can ask, hey, would this work or something like this possible? But no one can authorize work except the people who are authorized to authorize work. No is a complete sentence. You will learn how to say it.
It's one of the hardest words in the going to say in the English language, but I'm sure it's probably just the same for anyone that doesn't speak English as their first language.
Right. And 2-year-olds are great at it too. Why and no is their favorite words.
Yep, that's so true. That's so true.
We should promote them.
But it's you touched on something there that is so hard as well, and that I'm a great believer in the kind of extreme programming ideal of we should get the customers and the engineers talking and collaborating.
Absolutely.
And I want also, I've always encouraged engineers to talk to people in finance, talk to sales, talk to marketing, cross-team collaboration, learn about the business, learn about the other people, partly to try and encourage a understanding of the domain knowledge, and partly to avoid the us and them friction. So you view each of those people. It's not marketing department. It's Steve and Jane in marketing or whatever. It's, they're real people. They're
Humanize
not,
them.
they're not trying to, sales aren't trying to get you in trouble by promising a customer a feature they want. Sales are just trying to get some sales so that we all get paid at the end of the month. So let's all try and find a way of working together. So you want to encourage that everyone to communicate, everyone to talk, everyone to build relationships. And at the same time, you're like, actually, I want to put barriers here. I don't want you just to talk to everyone and agree to everything. We want some structure and flow. So I always find that that's a little bit of a tension that a lot of teams and a lot of leaders struggle with.
They really do. A lot of people are vying for your work in software engineering as a team, as individuals too. And it's easy to get this us and them mentality, the in group versus the out group, to put it in the anthropological frame. And it's kind of like a marriage. You have to help people realize it's not engineering and marketing against each other. It's marketing and engineering against the problem. What problem are we all trying to solve? And I think it goes the other way too. It would help for sales and marketing and support to get a look into the daily life of the engineers too, for the humanization to go both ways. Say, okay, these are just people trying to do their best. And when there's friction, don't assume malice. There's probably a good reason. Try to understand that reason before you escalate that tension.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's very rarely malice. We're all normally trying to be on the same team, pushing in the same direction.
Yes.
And sometimes that friction is also the accidental creation of leadership. Some people saying, well, you say that engineering team doesn't work, engineering is difficult. And when you get the C-suite seem to be particularly bad at this, one member of the C-suite saying, well, you've got to deal with engineering. Maybe they're the CMO and they're difficult. You're now creating that culture again. You might not be trying to create the barriers, but again, that leadership difference, you're creating that barrier now and giving the marketing team, for example, permission to think that engineering are difficult. We don't expect cooperation from them. We've got to work around them. And it would be better if instead we have our leaders think more consciously about, well, actually, what are the frictions? How can I help? How can I resolve that? How can I make these teams work better together? And I think a common problem I often see there is that people at the C-suite, and I find CTOs particularly bad at this, or maybe I'm just more exposed to them, forget that they are, a CTO, not part of the engineering team. They are part of the executive team.
Right.
The engineering team is their second team. The executive team is their first team. So they should always be looking to collaborate and build that collaboration at their level, and then encouraging the people level down from them to be collaborating at their level as well, so that we create that collaboration and approach of how do we work together as a team, rather than creating these vertical silos where we've got marketing and engineering software. Well, we're not. We're all one organization trying to achieve the same thing.
Absolutely. There's the problem is distance. I think the C-suite, they solve different problems than the implementation layer, which is engineering and marketing and things. They're trying to figure out strategic direction and what's going to happen months and years from now, and that's a different problem space. And their distance away from the daily challenges can make them seem abstract enough where it's easy to just throw a label and say, well, you just have to deal with engineering. They're difficult. They say no to everything. I heard that when I went in to that company that was struggling. I think it was, I'll probably get this wrong, maybe Mark Twain, who said, don't confuse the map with knowing the territory. The C-suite knows the map very well, but sometimes you have to go explore the territory and get the ground truths of the realities down in your implementation layer to make good decisions at the top.
Yeah, I like that. And yeah, a great way of doing that is to, again, this works so much better when you're in the office, which I hate to say as somebody that prefers remote work, but it works so much better in the office when you could just wander around to wherever marketing or engineering sit.
Right.
Go and talk to somebody, instead of banging out a Slack message or doing a voice call or email, stand up, walk to somebody's desk, or, I guess if you're remote, the equivalent is set up a meeting, jump on a call, and talk to that person as face to face as you can and just discuss it properly. Again, build that personal relationship and have a focus
Right.
on that.
I like how you touched on the challenges of doing this in a remote culture. It's different, but I don't think it's impossible. I've been working fully remote now for, I've had remote teams for over 10 years. And something we do, I actually pulled this trick from one of my jobs that I had while I was going to college. I worked in a motorcycle shop, and we called it working with the garage doors open, where anyone could come in and observe the mechanics and the implementation layer doing what they do, and they could ask questions. They had to be respectful and not dominate them, but it was a very open and transparent way of doing business, and I tried to recreate that with my remote team. So we had a Slack channel that was called the Garage. And that's where the engineers would be, they'd be pair programming together, working through things, doing screen shares. And it was just an open forum for mostly the engineers to collaborate, but anyone in the company could stop by and see what was going on if they were curious. We'd have project managers drop in sometimes, president and CEO occasionally. And, I only had to revoke someone's garage pass once, but finding ways to have that hallway conversation in a digital hallway it's different, but it's possible if you're willing to put the work into it. In fact, I've flipped it around a little bit. Just because you have a physical presence and location and you're co-located doesn't mean you have a culture. Sometimes all you have is a terrarium where you have people in close proximity, but there's no real connection. There's no common bond. It's just you're here so we can keep an eye on you. That's another kind of default culture that won't serve your business well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's some real challenges to creating the culture when you're remote.
There are.
And they really, again, focus just around getting people to view each other as another human being that is not logical, is emotional, has good and bad days, and that you need to take a little bit of time to get to know each other. And I know as software engineers, we hate meetings. We hate the idea of spending more time on calls and so on. But
Yes.
it is actually useful because software engineering, for anything other than the most absolutely trivial of projects, is a team sport. So we have to learn to work together. We have to build that relationship. And that we shouldn't kind of view meetings as unnecessary for that. We should view that some of those are worthwhile. It doesn't mean we have to have 20 hours of meetings a week, but a little bit of time to get to know each other, build relationships, see each other as humans is very beneficial, I think.
I think so too. Another way I've done that with remote teams is we'll have Slack channels dedicated to things that aren't 100% about work. We'll have a channel dedicated for hobbies. If people like to talk about their hobbies and share the kind of stuff you would share, in the break room, in the hallway, getting your cup of coffee. You want to talk about the sports game. It's an open forum for that sort of thing. We can see the human aspects of each other. We'll have a memes channel. We love our memes. And we'll post software engineering memes as a way to get some laughs and kind of break down the barriers between people that are on different continents and get them to gel a bit more of a team. Like I said, it's hard. You have to do it with a lot more deliberation, and sometimes that gives you at least as good a result, sometimes even better than if you're all under the same roof, I think. Be deliberate in how you put your team and your culture together.
Yeah, and I think it's even more important these days because we have a lot more globalization.
Yes.
Even going back to before COVID in 2020, for 5-6 years before then, I was increasingly working with teams where we were in office 100% of the time,
Right.
but not all in the same office. I had one team where I had people in Edinburgh, Madrid, Australia, Salt Lake City, and Austin, Texas, as well as London and Newbury. So 30 people spread across 7 or 8 locations and different time zones. So even then, it's not as simple as we're in the office. We can just create the culture. You can
Right.
still be very, very distributed and have to find those ways of doing that. In a way, I almost think that sometimes that can be harder as well, because you've got groups of people who are in the same office who may collaborate all in the same time zone. And then you've got other little groups that are separate. So even more conscious effort, I think, there to work around that.
Yeah, because they'll form their own in groups. And distance is the easiest way to see other people as less than human as you. If world history has taught us anything, it's that probably.
Yes, and people, I think, cover this, and maybe the Mythical Man Month.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those books looked at how we worked, and we're still failing to learn the lessons from them. What is it, 50 years after they were written?
Yep.
Which
It's
is quite
timeless
staggering.
wisdom, because the hardware all that's running on hasn't changed.
Yes, as you said at the beginning, it's been 100,000 years and we're fundamentally still the same. Cool. So I think the final thing I want to wrap up on is something you said to me when we talked a couple of weeks ago, that
Okay.
software engineering is humanity. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's a dangerous topic. We call ourselves engineers, and there's certainly engineering aspects to it. We plan, we have architectures, we build things. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, there's just as much craft and art to it as there is what you would traditionally refer to as engineering. Engineers in the physical world, they build bridges and roads and buildings with fairly predictable and consistent methods and outcomes. They can predict pretty well how long it's going to take to build, however many kilometers of road. Software engineering, we're still figuring that out, and we have brand new ways of doing things come with increasing regularity and frequency that kind of mix up the deck. And I think if we admit to ourselves, there's a lot of humanity in what we're doing. I'll say computers are a science, but software is a humanity. It's as much craft and art as it is bits and switches, in my opinion. And just embrace that.
Yeah, I think to expand on that analogy, if you take an engineer building a bridge, say, fundamentally all suspension bridges look the same. There's certain laws of physics that if you're going to suspend a bridge, you suspend it from something, and that something is going to be under tension, and there's all the physics and so on that apply to that. Where we come along and say we're going to build some software to do, I don't know, tax planning, there's so many different ways we could do that. It could be a mobile app, a web app, it could be, I don't know, it could have a chat interface these days with AI. It's could take on so many different forms, so many different ways of doing it. There's so many different options we could do before we even get to how we build it, but what it is could be different in so many ways. So it's software, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's soft and malleable, and there's a lot of flexibility to that we don't have in that, I guess we could call it bridge hardware.
I like that. That revelation just came with it, puts the soft in software. You have a completely blank canvas, and you get to decide what kind of paint or charcoal you're going to use, or any other medium. And it could start anywhere and it could end anywhere in the precise same way that building a bridge or a building cannot.
Yeah. And I think that's probably why they named it software like 70, 80 years ago.
They were onto something.
All those people that came before us whose wisdom we keep ignoring. Excellent. Thank you, Robert. It's been a pleasure talking to you. If anyone wants to follow up, how can they get hold of you? And we'll put links in the show notes so you don't have to spell anything out.
I am on LinkedIn constantly. That is the absolute best place to find me.
All right,
so we'll
awesome.
put a link to my profile up there.
Great. Thanks very much, Robert. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being on.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Coding Chats. If you did, please like and subscribe. And feel free to check out these other videos on a similar topic.